Okay, so picture this. You step off the train at Nakano Station in the western part of Tokyo, and it just looks normal. There's a covered shopping arcade, a supermarket, a few ramen shops, salary workers heading home. Nothing about this place screams historic. Nothing about this place says anything, really. But here's the thing. You've heard of Akihabara. Everyone has. Neon signs, anime posters covering every wall, maid cafes on every corner. It's become the global face of Japanese otaku culture. Every travel blog, every YouTube video about Japan, they all point you to Akihabara. But here's what they don't tell you. Akihabara wasn't where it started. The real origin story, the place where Japan's otaku culture was born, where it survived, where it refused to die even when everything around it changed, is here, in Nakano, inside a building that most tourists walk right past. And the story of how that happened? It involves a Meiji-era war hero, a 2-square-meter manga shop, and a legal structure so complicated it accidentally created a cultural monument. That's what this video is about. To understand Nakano Broadway, you have to go back to 1966. Japan is in the middle of its post-war economic miracle. The country is rebuilding, fast. New highways, new bullet trains, new everything. And in this moment of ambition, a group of local merchants in Nakano had an idea. North of Nakano Station, there was a covered shopping arcade. People loved it, but it hit a dead end. Literally, it stopped abruptly at a wall, and there was nothing on the other side. The merchants wanted to punch through to the next main road. They wanted to build something big. So a developer called Tokyo Co-op Sales started buying up land, block by block. And that's when things got complicated, because one of the plots they needed had belonged to General Nogi Maresuke, a Meiji-era military hero, the man who led the siege of Port Arthur in the Russo-Japanese War. He died in 1912, following the Emperor Meiji in ritual suicide. His land passed to his descendants, and those descendants were not easy to negotiate with. But somehow, they made it work, and construction began. The final price tag, 6 billion yen. In 1960s money. That was a staggering amount, and it nearly broke the developer. To recover costs, they made a decision that would define the building forever. They crammed in as much floor space as physically possible. Low ceilings, narrow corridors, tiny units. The building maxed out every regulation that existed at the time, because new, stricter laws were coming in 1965, and they had to move fast before they took effect. The result was a 10-story behemoth, 140 meters long, 58,000 square meters of floor space, ground floor, a shopping arcade with around 350 stores, upper floors, luxury apartments. The building was called Nakano Broadway. The concept was ambitious. Everything you need without ever leaving the building. Groceries, clothing, restaurants, a pharmacy, all inside. The apartments above were marketed as the finest in Nakano. It was post-war Japan's vision of the future, wrapped in concrete. And then the future didn't show up. Through the late 1960s and into the 1970s, the tenants started leaving. New shopping centers were opening in the suburbs. Chains were undercutting independent stores. The building that was supposed to be a destination became something else entirely, empty. By the late 1970s, Nakano Broadway had a problem. Vacancy rates were climbing. The building's complex ownership structure, hundreds of individually owned units, made it almost impossible to coordinate any kind of coordinated revival plan. Landlords couldn't agree on anything. The building was quietly falling apart, and nobody knew what to do with it. Until one man walked in with a very specific plan. His name was Furukawa Masuzu, and in 1980, he opened a used manga store on the second floor of Nakano Broadway. The store was 2 square meters. Let that sink in. 2 square meters. That's roughly the size of a closet. 1 person, a box of manga, and not much else. But the rent was cheap because nobody wanted to be in Nakano Broadway anymore. And Furukawa had noticed something. There was a huge appetite for secondhand manga and almost nowhere to buy it. So he started small. He called the store Mandarake. It worked. Manga fans found it. Word spread. The store expanded, not into one bigger unit, but into more units. Then more. The labyrinthine corridors of Nakano Broadway, which had seemed like a design flaw, turned out to be the perfect architecture for a very specific kind of shopping experience. You wander, you explore, you turn a corner and find a glass case full of first edition Dragon Ball volumes from 1984. You go down a staircase and discover an entire floor dedicated to vintage tokusatsu figurines. You're not shopping, you're hunting. That feeling, that treasure hunt feeling, doesn't work in a clean, modern retail space. It only works in a building that feels like it was designed by someone who had never heard of retail logic. And once Mandarake succeeded, others followed. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, the empty units in Nakano Broadway filled back up, but not with the stores the original developers had imagined. Instead, anime shops, doujinshi dealers, vintage toy stores, retro video game sellers, idle merchandise stalls. By the mid-1990s, Nakano Broadway had become one of the 3 great otaku pilgrimage sites in Tokyo, alongside Akihabara and Ikebukuro. 40 to 50% of its stores were now subculture focused. Mandarake alone had expanded to over 30 stores, not 30 locations across Japan, but 30 individual specialty shops inside this one building. 1 floor for comics, 1 for figurines, 1 for cosplay, 1 for rare items. Each one staffed by someone who knew that specific thing deeply. Not a chain, not a brand, a collection of obsessives. Now here's the part that's easy to miss. Why didn't a big corporation come in and do what corporations always do? Buy up the space, standardize it, turn it into a proper retail destination? Because they couldn't. Remember that ownership structure? Hundreds of individually owned units from the original construction? That hadn't changed. Every single unit had its own owner. To buy the building, or even a significant portion of it, you'd have to negotiate with hundreds of different people, all of whom had different ideas about what they wanted. Big capital hates that. It's inefficient, it's messy, it's legally complicated. So big capital walked away. And in doing so, it left the building to the obsessives, to the small shop owners who didn't care about foot traffic optimization or brand synergies. They cared about the thing they sold. That ownership structure, the thing that almost killed Nakano Broadway, is the exact reason it survived as something real. Now, let's talk about Akihabara, because this is where the 2 stories split. Akihabara started as an electronics district, radio parts after the war, then hi-fi equipment, then personal computers. Otaku culture crept in through the 1990s. Anime shops, doujinshi, figurines. By 2000, It had its own identity as a subculture hub. And then came 2005. That year, two things happened that changed Akihabara forever. A novel called Densha Otoko, Train Man, was adapted into a TV drama. It was based on a 2-channel forum post about a nerdy guy who falls in love on a train. It was watched by millions, and it did something unprecedented. It made otaku culture sympathetic to the mainstream. A KB-48 opened their theater in Akihabara. Instead of performing in arenas once a year, they were on stage every single day in a small venue, close enough to make eye contact. Idol culture had never felt that accessible. More mainstream attention, more cameras, more coverage. Akihabara became a story, and stories attract storytellers, TV crews, journalists, tourists. By the late 2000s, the government had latched onto cool Japan as a cultural export strategy. Akihabara was the poster child. It got cleaned up, redeveloped, international signage, tax-free shopping, tour buses, and slowly, the people who had built Akihabara, the weird independent shops, the obsessive collectors, started getting pushed out. Real estate prices rose. Chain stores moved in. The maid cafes multiplied until they became a parody of themselves. Akihabara became a theme park version of otaku culture. Designed for people who had heard of otaku culture but didn't actually live inside it. Nakano watched all of this happen, and Nakano changed almost nothing. Not because it didn't want to, but because it couldn't. That same ownership structure that blocked big capital in the 1980s is still there. The building's units are still owned by hundreds of individuals. The management association can handle maintenance and security. But any major renovation, any significant change to the building's commercial identity requires consensus that is functionally impossible to achieve. You want to redesign the corridors? You need agreement from hundreds of owners. You want to rebrand the building? Same problem. You want to run a new air conditioning line through a shared wall? You guessed it. Committee vote. This is why the building still looks exactly like it did in 1980. Not because nobody cares, because getting anything done requires a consensus that functionally does not exist. The building is frozen, not by design, by legal structure. And here's the irony. That frozen state is now its biggest selling point. The foreign visitors who flood into Nakano Broadway on weekends, and there are a lot of them, up to 50,000 people on a busy Saturday, half of whom are now tourists. They're not coming for something new. They're coming for something old, something that feels real, something that hasn't been smoothed over and optimized for an Instagram post. Mandarake's annual revenue has hit 15 billion yen, record highs, growing every year, driven in part by international collectors who know that if you want the rare stuff, the things that don't exist on any online marketplace, the items that require someone who really knows, you come here. The building that couldn't change became the building that didn't change, and that's become its identity. But here's what that actually means, structurally. The building is almost 60 years old. The original construction from 1966 was designed to squeeze maximum floor space out of regulations that no longer exist. The corridors are narrow by modern standards. The ceiling heights are low. The electrical systems are aging. There have been seismic assessments. And rebuilding? Essentially impossible. You'd need to buy out hundreds of individual owners, many of whom have no incentive to sell. A large-scale renovation would require a consensus vote that has never been achieved on anything significant. Nakano Broadway is not just frozen culturally, it is frozen structurally. The building cannot meaningfully evolve. It can only continue exactly as it is until it can't anymore. And that brings us to the thing just outside. You might have noticed it when you came in from the station. A large structure wrapped in construction fencing. That was Nakano Sun Plaza, a concert hall and hotel that opened in 1973 and closed in 2023 after 50 years. It hosted some of the most legendary rock concerts in Japanese history. People cried when it shut down. The plan was to demolish it and replace it with a massive new development. Office towers, hotels, a 7,000-seat entertainment hall. The budget, 181 billion yen. Then construction costs exploded globally. The budget doubled, 350 billion yen, and climbing. The entire plan was scrapped. The Ward Council voted unanimously to cancel the contract with the developer. Ownership of the empty building was transferred back to the city. As of now, the new target is 2034, 8 years from now. Maybe. So, here's the picture. Outside, a landmark that the city tore down before it knew what to replace it with. A budget that fell apart before a single new wall was built. A district in mid-demolition, frozen not by legal complexity, but by economic reality. Inside, a building that has survived every force that should have changed it. Recessions, the rise of the internet, the commodification of otaku culture, the death of physical retail, half a century of urban development pressure. It's all passed through Nakano Broadway like water through stone, and the stone is still standing. But stone doesn't stand forever. The building is old. The owners are aging. At some point, the legal structure that protected this place will become the legal problem that ends it. A seismic event, a fire, a slow accumulation of deferred maintenance, and the calculus changes overnight. Nakano Broadway is still here. The city around it is changing. And if history tells us anything, it's only a matter of time. If you made it this far, thank you. If you want to see more stories like this from the parts of Japan that don't make it into the travel guides, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.